Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. After a very busy and eventful week for the Scottish Family Party, I'm sure if you've been following our social media or mainstream media as well, you'll have seen the protest outside the Parliament last Thursday. Huge crowd there, some estimates, 500 people. That's fantastic. A lot of media coverage. Great to see that. Responding to the Gender Recognition Act reform. I mean, other family party news. But the first thing to say, if any of you are waiting for replies for me about things, I've been extremely busy recently. I'm struggling to keep up with things, but I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can if you're waiting for something. I brought us up in Stirling today, meeting our new campaign manager, who's now in action. And so we'll be starting candidate training in, I think it's the 3rd of February, maybe. So not too far away. Candidate training is scheduled. That's also for people who want to explore the possibility of being an election candidate for us in the future. I mean, primarily in the Westminster election, which is going to be sometime next year. It's going to be by the end of next year. So if you've got any interest in, being a candidate, exploring that possibility, do email campaignmanager@scottishfamily.org. Campaign manager, just all one word, campaignmanager@scottishfamily.org. Say hello to our campaign manager there, and he will circulate the details of our forthcoming training. What tends to happen with elections is when people get fired up because there's an election coming up, it's a bit late to actually start preparing for it. So we need people who've been through the process, who are trained and ready to go, even start campaigning months and months and months before the election comes around. So we want to be as prepared as we possibly can for the Westminster election. So do email campaignmanager@scottishfamily.org. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to see you at the training. Now, what's been happening in the news? I'll just cover a few stories before I introduce this evening's guest. I had to reread this story and then check it from another source because it seems so unbelievable. And this was a Freedom of Information request about the students accepted to study law at Edinburgh University. And the way it works in Scotland is basically you're given priority or you get a lower offer. You need lower grades if you meet certain criteria, like you're from a poorer area or a school that's traditionally had less good results, or you've really hit the jackpot in terms of entry requirements if you've been in local authority care, or if you're a refugee. I assume that includes an asylum seeker as well. That gives you priority. And law in Edinburgh, I think they took 178 students, something like that. Every single one of them met one of these special criteria. Every single one of them. In other words, if you were the average Scottish applicant and your parents have been paying their taxes in Scotland throughout their whole lives, your chance of getting in to study law at Edinburgh University appear to have been zero. Absolutely zero. The average Scottish applicant. It's just utterly bizarre. But that's that. So when I first read that, I thought, surely I'm misinterpreting that. Surely this can't be true. Then I saw another article about it, and it is absolutely true. Absolutely true. I mean, is that just not bizarre? I mean, the very idea that you have different grades for different groups of people, I mean, that just leads to injustices to individuals. But even if you think that's the right thing to do, to take it to the extent that 0% of your pupils admitted are from the top 60% of schools or wealthy areas or whatever. It's just appalling. I mean, again, that there should be absolute outrage among pupils in Scotland and from parents in Scotland as well. Because in a lot of cases, their children are working hard to win places in these universities, and to the pupils themselves, you've worked hard to win a place in these universities, but you may as well not have bothered because you had no chance because you didn't tick the right boxes. And I would recommend that people should be very angry about that because it is an injustice. Now, you might have seen the National newspaper did a bit of I wouldn't quite describe it as a hit piece, but an article designed to be critical of the Scottish Family Party this week. And it was following the protest at the Parliament. And what they did basically, they know that we campaign against what we see as vulgar and corrupting sex education, indoctrination into the government's philosophy of sex, sexuality and gender. So we make our views clear about that. So the way to get back at us, I mean, what they could do is come and like respond to our points, offer counter arguments. But of course, they're not interested in that. I haven't got any time for that. What they need to do is try and show that somehow or other we're associated with bad people. We're the bad people and someone else has been offended and upset. So they had a teacher by the name of John Naples Campbell, who I'm very familiar with. He's an LGBT campaigner. And I'm not sure he works for, but he has a position with the General Teaching Council for Scotland. So he's part of the establishment. So he was telling the story how he'd been driven out of teaching because of, well, he didn't say threats, because I don't think they actually had any mean threats, but basically some people saying offensive things, which they shouldn't have said, but that's Twitter, that's the online world, unfortunately. So he was saying people have said these nasty things, and then the link was, he was trying to say, and the reason they say them is because of the Scottish Family Party. That was the sort of smear they were trying. I mean, pretty pitiful, really. I mean, anyone with any sense reading it would realize what was going on. His opening line was that he was scared of getting acid thrown in his face or getting stabbed. There was no justification given for those fears at all. So melodramatic and ridiculous. But the National seems to be giving us a lot of attention these days. We seem to be mentioned in it virtually every day at the moment, which are always negative. They're always trying to sort of demonize us or misrepresent us. But that's fine. We'd rather have that than being ignored. So keep at it, the National. Keep up the good work. I've made a video about that article in the National. You can see that on the YouTube channel. Now, I'm going to make a video tomorrow about the Conservatives' shenanigans with regard to the Gender Recognition Act reform and the conversion therapy ban, because I'm really, really annoyed with the Conservatives. The way they operate is so cynical and opportunist, because they've put the spanner in the works with the Gender Recognition Act reform. Why at this stage? I mean, this has been in the process for 3 years. Why were they not raising these issues? Well, there are two. The issues they've raised, it's not that a man can't actually become a woman. It's not that this ideology is ruining young people's lives. It's not that this ideology is tearing families apart. It's the fact that it would make it harder to monitor the gender pay gap and this sort of thing. It's a trivial nonsense. There are not the real reasons. The real reason they've thrown a spanner in the works is they think it will be a good way to defend the union, because they think it's unpopular. So they think the people of Scotland will say, oh, thanks very much, UK government, for saving us from what the Scottish government would have done. I'm not sure that tax is going to work. I'll talk about that more in a video tomorrow. But then the Conservative Party would have been thinking, oh, right, so we've gone out of a limb. We've sort of done something that transgender activists are not going to like. We've sort of upset the LGBT lobby. So we need to redress the balance. So what shall we do today to try and stay on the right side of them? And today they announced that they are going to go ahead with a conversion therapy ban, and that they're intending that it includes transgender people as well. I mean, a few months ago, they said they thought they didn't need a conversion therapy ban at all. Then there's a Twitter storm. So they said, okay, let's have one in any case, but we won't include transgender. And now, because they need to just balance things up so they don't get called transphobic, the very next day after they put the spanner in the works of the Gender Recognition Act, they said they are going to include transgender in their conversion therapy ban. And they're just absolutely cynical. So, for example, the parents who find themselves dragged off by the police and questioned, maybe even in prison, because of the conversations they have with their children about gender identity. The reason that's happened is the Conservatives wanted to introduce that law just because their sort of spin doctors thought this is the right time to make that sort of promise. I mean, utterly, utterly unprincipled. But anyway, I will make a video about that tomorrow. I'll look out for it. Right, this evening's guest, I'm going to introduce to you, and then I'm going to find out a little bit more about him. And now, sometimes describe Scotland as a debate desert, because very frequently I'm inviting people to come onto this live stream to debate, people of different points of view. And it's a debate desert. It's very hard to get anyone to actually come on. Sometimes someone says, oh, yes, I'll come on. Then they back out at the last minute. If they're from any sort of organization, generally they just won't go near it, that they won't come on to debate. But occasionally we do indeed find someone who's willing to come on and enter into discussion. So I'm delighted to welcome Bryan Ross. Right, Bryan, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Richard. Good to see you.
Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself? Where are you in Scotland?
I'm in the beautiful, sunniest city in Scotland. I'm in Dundee. Uh,
Okay.
so, yeah, a little bit about myself. Born and bred in Dundee. Love Scotland with all my heart. Love the people with all my heart. And yeah, I think the people that usually watch your channel might not be fans of me by the time we finish this video. Not that I'm going to do
Uh-huh.
anything to offend you or anybody else, but I just think that
Well,
this is going to be a debate. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Looking forward to it. Do you want to tell us a bit about your background, your employment, studies, whatever
Yeah,
else?
I'm from a working class background. My family worked in the jute mills. My grandparents worked in the jute mills, um, and I went to Dundee University to study English and
Okay.
left there with a degree. And I've been in my place of employment now for a couple of years
Uh-huh.
after changing jobs after lockdown. So yeah, quite happy where I am. Yep.
Good, very good. How about political involvement? Have you been involved in any political party or campaigning?
Not so much. I mean, it's one of those things, you'll find that you think you find a party that matches your ideals, and then you scratch beneath the surface, and you don't want any part of it. So, I had to go back in the day with the Socialist Party back in my younger, more impressionable years, and
Okay.
I backed off after the first meeting. It was just not a nice place to be.
Okay.
But as for any political involvement, no, I'm not involved with any parties. No.
I'm quite curious to hear a bit more about your experience in the Scottish Socialist Party. But I'm imagining you might want to be discreet there. Would you like to tell us more about what was below the surface, or do you
Oh
have more
well,
to explain?
as I said, I only went to one meeting, but it very much seemed to be you do what we tell you to do type deal. I think that was the old Scottish Socialist Party under Tommy. No,
Sheridan.
I can't remember. Tommy Sheridan. That was
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that was back in what 2003, I think. Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
20 years ago now. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Interesting. Interesting. Which areas of politics would you say you're particularly interested in at the moment?
Well, very much human rights, equalities. I mean, I do have a strong passion for Scottish independence, but I think your position is that you're neutral on it. So I
That's
don't
right.
think that should really come into the discussion. But yeah, when it comes to that, that's pretty much where my allegiances lie, and
Okay.
not to any party, but just to certain ideals. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have lots to talk about. We'll try and bring comments in from time to time. I've remembered to get them up on my screen this evening. Right, you mentioned human rights has been really important to you. Now, I would describe myself as ambivalent towards human rights. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. I've got various reservations about them. One of my reservations about them is that they're often very vague. So you end up with, instead of law being made by the elected politicians, the decisions end up being made by judges, because the rights are not very specific. So it ends up the judges are sort of effectively making up law on the hoof, which I feel is undemocratic.
Okay. Yeah, I could see where you're coming from, but I think when it comes to human rights, in my view anyway, anything that's conducive to people being able to live better lives overall in happier, more wealthy societies where everybody has a fair chance. That's my kind of view on human rights. But I fully agree that the legal definitions that are set out by these big overarching government bodies the language can be quite fluffy and open to interpretation. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, can you tell me a human right that you think is really important in Scotland?
Oh, I think you see it's kind of a tricky one because there's not really one that I would say is like the most important. I think that the right to an education, the right to fair employment, the right to housing, all the basic rights I think need to be met, and I don't think that they're being met at the moment.
Okay, right.
Um,
So let's go to education. In what way would you say that people's right to an education being fulfilled? Do you mean by the quality of education on offer in Scotland, or in another way?
Yeah, I've got two daughters. They're teenagers. They're kind of going through high school just now, and I think that their education has been great. They're wonderful people, but I think that there are certain groups of people that might go to schools in lower socioeconomic areas. They might not do so well just because of the way that the school's set up. Maybe the quality of teaching isn't as good as it could be. The resources aren't as good as they could be. So
Right.
I think every child needs to be treated equally. Yeah.
Okay. What you're getting at there is basically the attainment gap type issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is the central focus of the Scottish Government's education policy that is shared by every other party in the Scottish Parliament. They all say that closing the attainment gap is their priority. Now, the Scottish Family Party, you might be surprised to hear, I wouldn't say that closing the attainment gap is a priority, because I believe that an attainment gap between sort of wealthy and less wealthy areas is inevitable. That's always going to be the case, because I don't believe that academic ability is evenly distributed across income groups. So I believe even if the schools were absolutely equally as good, you would still find that in the wealthier areas, there would be higher academic attainment than in the less wealthy areas. Now, that's not to say there will be particular issues in certain areas, and particular schools might need extra support. With that, particular pupils might need extra support, but then that should be targeted more individually rather than on, an assessment of the whole area. Do you agree with that, though? That we should expect schools in different areas to have different levels of academic attainment?
I mean, I don't think it should be an expectation. I think that school A, top grade schools, they will have a higher percentage of pupils that go on to further education and to higher paying jobs and things like that. And you will have that kind of social background that maybe prevents some of the poorer students from poorer schools getting as far as that. But to me, I don't think that there should be any hindrance to a child just because of the background that they have. They should be able to, a kid from, I don't know, ridiculously poor area, let's say Douglas and Dundee, a very, very poor area, they should be able to get themselves to Oxford if they have the ability to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Every pupil should be encouraged and taught and supported to attain everything that they possibly can. I would certainly agree with that. Just moving on, are there any other aspects of education that you would be having? One of the things we talk about is we feel that discipline is basically falling to bits in a lot of schools in Scotland. And we believe that a lot of the reason for that is partly it's the message of children's rights. No one's got the right to tell you what to do. You should be treated like an adult. So the whole idea of adult authority has been undermined, and the concept and practice of punishment is being pushed out of Scottish education, which in our view is leading to a breakdown in discipline on a huge scale across Scottish schools. Would you agree with that?
From the evidence that I've seen, no. I mean, it is anecdotal evidence. It's kind of specific to me. My children, their friends, the schools that they go to, while they will have pupils that are disruptive, and schools might not have the abilities to deal with those pupils as well as they might want to, or as well as they used to be able to. It is a tricky one, because how do you deal with the troubled students? How do you deal with the ones that are causing trouble, that are being disruptive? When the latest evidence suggests that disciplining children might be ineffective in the long run. Some of the things that I've looked into, I'm not a believer in discipline. I don't discipline my children, but they don't need to be disciplined. They're not unruly kids or anything like that. But I've never had to discipline my children.
Right, that's interesting. What do you mean by discipline?
I mean, discipline is, I think I raised my voice to my daughters once, and that was when they ran across the road when they shouldn't have. That's the extent of discipline I've given my children. Yeah.
And so, have you ever said to them, if you do that again, then we're not going to let you do this, or take something off them because they've not done what you've said, anything like that?
maybe when they were 2 or 3, when it was just a kind of idle go, oh, that's bad behaviour, we don't go and touch the hot things and things like that. But as they've grown up, I've never really had to discipline my children. I'm not some kind of wishy-washy hippie, peace and love, don't ever, I've just never had to enact any kind of discipline. I've never had to ground them, never had to take anything away from them.
Right.
But quite an active parent, quite involved in their lives. And I believe that, I guide them as best I can. And, they make the decisions that they do, and they've been the right decisions. And I try and help them. If they make an incorrect decision, then I say to them, right, okay, let's work out why that was a bad decision and how we avoid making that decision in the future.
Okay. Yeah. How about for your position? Do you need any, if you like, sort of threat of punishments to influence your behaviour through the justice system? Is there any law, in other words, that you follow just because you're afraid of the punishment? Do you drive a car or a motorbike?
I don't drive at all. I don't drive at all. I never have. No.
Okay.
No. But I've killed everybody I've ever wanted to kill, and that's been nobody. So I think that maybe some litter laws and things like that, I might have broken those in the past, but no, I don't think the threat of punishment is anything that's kind of that makes me be a good person. I make my decisions based on whether it's morally right or wrong.
Okay. I suppose I wouldn't necessarily say the threat of punishment would make someone a good person, but it might prevent them from behaving badly, from doing something wrong. I mean, do you agree that society needs the threat of punishment to maintain law and order? Or do you think that it could be done away with at some point in the future?
I don't think any country will ever do away with prisons. I don't think any country could ever do away with the legal system, because those legal systems need to be there so that we can address the problem children, if you will, of society.
Right.
I don't believe in kind of corporal punishment. I don't believe in excessive punishment. I think that prisons should be a place of reform. They shouldn't be a place of isolation. They shouldn't be a place of punishment. I think they should be a place where people could be educated, obviously kept away from society because they're a danger, and if they are a danger.
Yep. But you agree that sending people to prison is a form of punishment?
I would agree so, yes.
Yeah, that's why they're sent to prison. But would you say in general that you don't think punishment needs to play a part in the upbringing of children? I mean, do you believe that your children were sort of very unusual cases, or do you believe that that's generally applicable, that children don't need?
I very much agree that my children were unusual cases in that respect.
Right. Okay.
I work in a restaurant where kids are more than welcome to come with their families, and I'm all too familiar with how badly behaved kids can be, especially if they don't have any threat of punishment, i.e. parents around with them. So yeah, okay. I don't need to be told that there are some kids that need a bit of a telling off.
Okay, right. Okay, that's interesting. I've got lots of other things on my list. I thought, how about this one? Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech. What's your take on the state of freedom of speech in Scotland?
I'm a free speech absolutist. I believe that you shouldn't ever be punished for speaking what you feel. Obviously, I think that when that turns to abuse, then that's a different story. That becomes something completely different. But as far as you being able to speak your views, me being able to speak my views, nobody should be able to stop you from doing that, and there shouldn't be any punishments for speaking your mind.
Okay, but the normal exceptions to that would be, as you say, sort of aggressive, abusive, things that are not true as well. Obviously, it's not okay to go around saying things about people that are not true.
Yeah, every politician that ever existed, every lawyer that ever existed, I think they would be up for punishment if that's, yeah.
Well, for saying things that are not true about people. So if I said something about you that was just completely untrue, that was really defamatory, then you would have the right to take me to court, and I could end up in trouble for that. It could even be that I've committed a crime. Certainly there could be a civil case. I think it's right that there is provision in the legal system to stop people telling lies about you.
Oh, absolutely. And they're there to, if I go and accuse you of committing horrendous crimes that you've never committed, you're well within your rights to do that. But
Well, the other free speech exception normally is like causing fear or alarm. The classic illustration: you can't shout fire in a crowded theatre. So you can't. But within the sort of things we normally talk about with freedom of speech. So you would be. So everything that the Scottish Family Party says, obviously, you would think we should be entirely free to say that. How about the conversion therapy ban? Are you familiar with that?
I think that's pretty apt. I think that's something that that should be in place. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I would suggest that those two views are in tension, because the conversion therapy ban would prevent a person from saying to another person, for example, I believe that the path of changing gender isn't the best for you, and I suggest you reconsider that. That person will be a criminal under the proposed conversion therapy ban. So surely that's
I don't think having a conversation with somebody amounts to conversion therapy. Any institution that wants to put itself up as something that can change somebody's sexuality or gender identity, rightly so, they shouldn't be allowed to exist, because those kind of therapies just don't work. They're outright scams. They just don't work at all. But having a conversation with somebody, opening up some dialogue with somebody that maybe, as you say, suffers from gender confusion. But while there might be gender confusion, gender dysphoria is a real thing that does exist. Yeah. But we could always get to that. But we're on freedom of speech, and I don't think that anybody's going to get in trouble for simply having a conversation with somebody.
Right. I was, in my opinion, I would say that you've been basically, they've called it a conversion therapy ban because that's what they want you to think it's about. And I would suggest in your case that you do think it is actually about banning some form of formal therapy offered by organizations or professionals, whatever. So that's what it sounds like it's banning. And that's what you're assuming it's banning. But I think if you actually look at what's being proposed, it is anyone in any context having any sort of conversation, including parents, including any sort of casual conversation as well. So if I'm right about that it does cover any sort of conversation, say between parents and children, any sort of, you meet someone on the bus and just get talking, and you happen to say, well, if I were you, I'd think about doing this, that would be classed as conversion therapy. Assuming I'm right about that, would you regard that as an unacceptable infringement of freedom of speech?
Well, that's assuming that you're right, Richard, but I mean, I don't think that is the case. I would really think that people need to look that up and see what it actually says, because I find that very, very difficult to believe that the Scottish government would pass something so egregious as simply having a conversation with somebody. You're now in legal trouble. Yeah. Unless that conversation is about harming somebody or causing harm to one or more people, then have that conversation with somebody. There's nothing that, if one of my daughters came to me and said, "Dad, I'm transgender," I'd say, right, let's sit down and talk about that, because as a parent, I think I would know my own child. I would, if my daughter came up to me and said that to me, I would have to cast a little bit of doubt on that and say, right, okay, let's talk about that. Let's have a conversation and see where we land. So
if you were to cast doubt on it, then you'd be a criminal under what's proposed. It's a very early stage. The bill isn't actually drafted. They've just produced an expert document about it that lays out what they would like to go in the bill. So what's been laid out by the Scottish government appointed experts is that this sort of conversation should be included. It specifically says that one of the punishments or one of the steps taken in response to it could be removal of parental rights. So it's obviously definitely talking about conversations between parents and children. And that would be called trying to suppress someone's gender identity. So someone has said what they feel their gender identity is, and anyone who disagrees with that or suggests that that isn't really the case or shouldn't be the case, or they ought to move away from that gender identity, that would be classed as suppressing the gender identity, and that would come under the definition of the crime. But I would certainly encourage people to look it up. I made a video on it a while ago, going through the documents, and we can see what comes through in the Parliament when that comes up.
Just sorry to quickly just close up on that one. Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. If there is a law that's passed banning conversion therapy, if a child comes to the parent and tries to tell them, you know, this is my identity, this is who I am, and that parent then forces that child to, you know, go away for a holiday, which has happened in the States and happened in some Middle Eastern countries as well. And it is a pretty horrible thing. And if anybody does submit the child for that, then I fully agree that they should have their kids taken away from them. Yeah.
I think that sort of thing, that sort of activity basically doesn't exist in Scotland. If something's done against someone's will or involves some sort of like physical interventions or whatever, then that could be covered by existing laws. But what the campaigners want this to cover is they wanted to cover anyone advising people or help. So let's say you've got a person, let's say a Muslim young man, feels sexual attraction to other men, but because he's a Muslim, he thinks, right, I really don't want to go down that path. That doesn't line up with my beliefs. So I'll go and speak to the imam. I'll explain to him that this is what I want, and you know, I want to move away from these same-sex attractions, and I want to head in a different direction. So it goes to see the imam and says to the imam, can you talk to me about this? Can you help me? And if the imam were to say, yes, I think you're doing the right thing, I'll help you, that imam would be a criminal. That would be classed as conversion therapy, which I think in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of expression is outrageous. But we can see how it develops.
Yeah. Again, I know quite a fair few gay ex-Muslims, and they've the only experience they've had is get out. You're no longer a Muslim. Yeah, that's always been the experiences. They've told anybody it's, you know, you're not a Muslim.
Right. Well, on the other hand, I've met a few people who were gay and are now Muslims as well. So it goes. All right. It goes both ways. Just in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of expression as well. Another issue coming up in Scotland quite soon is the issue of buffer zones around abortion clinics, where the Scottish government is, as fast as it thinks it can, they're going to impose zones around abortion clinics where it will be illegal to stand and be there, or you know, that's the most extreme case. If they think you're standing there with the intention of influencing people or communicating some message, then that would be a crime. Well, what do you think about that from the freedom of expression point of view? I can't say freedom of speech because I'm not even saying anything. Freedom of expression point of view. Do you think that's okay?
So, okay, if you're not saying anything, then the only reason you would have to be questioned is if you're holding signs. And, you know, if you're holding some kind of sign or banner or wearing some kind of T-shirt that's got a kind of anti-abortion slogan or saying on it, then, you know, I think you should be kind of kept away from women that are obviously going through a really, really difficult time in their life and have unfortunately came to the decision that they've come to.
Just to go back, the proposals are that even if you've got no sign, no placard, no written, you're not saying anything, even if you're just there because it's an abortion clinic and you're just standing on the other side of the road, not doing anything, that would be legal. When a woman was arrested in England a week or so ago, she was standing outside an abortion clinic. The police came along and said, "Are you praying?" And she said, "I might be." So she was arrested. I'd hope that she'd be let go if she was just praying outside a building for. But the thing that the law specifically says you're not allowed to stand outside an abortion clinic and pray. I mean, that's what these bylaws say. So when the law comes in Scotland, that the Scottish government wants, it will cover that. It will say you basically can't do it. You just can't be there at all if it's for the purpose of the fact that you're there because you disapprove of abortion.
For the protection of the women, then yeah, I'd say that's fair enough because they're already going through a hard enough time as it is. They don't need any other hassle. They don't need any other people saying things to them, in some cases shouting things at them. I've seen it happen. They really don't need that. So that's where we're starting to the cause harm part now. If you're going to be going there when it comes to abortion, then that actively causes harm towards the women that are already going through a horrible time in their life. They don't need that. So yeah, it should be a law.
Okay, just pick up on something you said there. I think I heard you right. I think you said something like, if unfortunately a woman's chosen to have an abortion. Was that right? Was that what you said?
Yeah, words to that effect, yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to expand on that? Why do you think it's unfortunate when a woman chooses to have I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just asking you why you think it's unfortunate.
I don't think there's very many women that actively go out their way to have abortions. I don't think there might be the odd exception to the rule, but I think the vast majority of women that have an abortion do it for reasons that they would rather not have had. They would, for whatever reason, because that's there could be a myriad of reasons. They probably don't want to be there. They don't want to have to be going through that.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Yeah. So they say it is a really a sort of weighty issue, a very serious matter.
Yeah, I doubt there's very many women are having, and I just had an abortion party after it's happened. I think there
are some, but I agree. The vast majority, it's not.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any rationale for that? Do you think women are justified in feeling that this is a really weighty decision?
Yeah, I don't think it's ever something that should be a lightly taken decision. But again, if it's something that whatever that woman decides, it's up to her. I can't dictate anything. I don't really want to comment on it because I don't have female reproductive organs. I don't think I have a voice in this issue. It's a women's issue. Yeah.
I mean, there are some people who say having an abortion is just like having your tonsils out or whatever. It's just a straightforward, minor surgical procedure, or often now it's just medication. It's taking a drug to achieve the abortion. So a lot of people that say it's a very minor procedure of no significance. Basically, it's just removing the pregnancy matter or whatever they want to call it. So there are some people who are claiming that it shouldn't be seen as a really weighty issue. It's just a minor, trivial, in a sense, meaningless medical procedure. Whereas from what you're saying, and I would agree with you, that women don't seem to see it like that. They seem to see it as having been a really weighty decision. Now, I think those things can't both be true. Now, I would say the reason that women regard abortion as being a very weighty issue, a very serious decision, is that there's awareness that what's being dealt with there is not a part of their own body. It's a new one. It's a new human being developing within them. And that's what makes it such a weighty, serious issue for them. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but if the woman doesn't want to be supporting a human life for 9 months inside her body, nobody should force her to do that. It's pretty simple.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just trying to see where you stand on that. So that helps me to understand. So you're not denying that we're dealing with a human life here. You're saying that you think that the woman should have the decision-making power over the continued existence of that human life.
The woman should have ultimate authority over her body. And in the same way that I can't force my daughter to give me her kidney, she can't force me to give her blood. That's going to have to be a decision made. Nobody can force me to give a part of my body to save my daughter's life. If I make that decision not to do that, then that's going to ultimately be on me. So I think that it is a medical procedure. You're right, and it is a minor medical procedure in the early stages. However, there are different grades of emotional attachment, and that women might have. They might really want to have a baby, but they don't have the financial means. So that might be a really sad day for them. For others, it might be, no, I can't have a baby. This isn't in my life plan. I don't want to have a baby. I'll go and take the tablet.
Okay. I'd like to challenge you a little bit because I feel that there's a bit of a contradiction in what you were saying there, because you were agreeing that the unborn child is a human life, but then you were saying it's part of the mother's body. If it's a human life,
it's part of the mother's body.
Did you know?
It's not part of the mother's body, no.
It's not
Sorry,
part,
I didn't.
right, okay. But because you were using the analogy of, you can't take someone's kidney without their consent or whatever. But what we're talking about here is, so it's a human life that's not part of the mother's body. It's an independent, different, unique human life, separate to the mother's. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's dependent on the mother for sustenance and survival. It is a separate human life. Yeah.
Right. Okay. The depend. I mean, do you believe that human lives are less valuable when they're dependent on other people's? Like, say, someone's on a life support machine, or a little baby that needs almost constant care. Do you believe their lives are less valuable because they're dependent on others?
No, I wouldn't say so. No.
Because it seems to me that's what you're saying with regard to the unborn child. You seem to be saying, because the unborn child is dependent on the mother, therefore we don't need to value their life the way that we do, the way that we usually value human life.
I was kind of hoping to avoid the abortion issue today, but I thought we would get there eventually. And, because you're right, it's a human life. In the early stages, before it resembles anything being human, it's a simple set of cells, and I'd probably just killed as many cells that are in a zygote by scratching my nose just there. So while, human life is precious and should be valued, at the same time, you're devaluing the life of the woman to give more value to a fetus than you would to any other human being. Fetus is
Right. I would suggest that's not true, because when it comes to cases where there is a genuine balance between the life of the mother and the life of the unborn child, generally, even the most ardent pro-life campaigners would agree that in that situation, it can be justified to prioritize the life of the mother. So in cases where the two lives are genuinely being balanced against each other, then I think that's the point where, as I say, pro-life campaigners generally say, okay, that could be permissible to have for abortion for the sake of. But what we're talking about generally, though, we're not weighing the two lives. We're weighing a life against sort of peripheral factors of a life, convenience or whatever else, however else you want to put it. So you're not comparing a life with a life. You're comparing a life with basically someone's desires or wishes or life plans, which I think is a very different. No,
I think that pro-life campaigners want to give more rights to a fetus than they do to the mother.
I disagree. There's no one saying that mothers should be killed.
No, I'm not saying that.
Someone going around.
No, I'm sorry, Richard. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, you want to grant extra rights to fetuses that every other human being doesn't have. I don't have the right to take your kidneys, and that fetus doesn't have the right to depend on its mother for sustenance. It just doesn't have that right because nobody else has that right.
Okay,
if I can't care for my kids, I don't kill them. I give them up because they can potentially survive. If that fetus cannot survive outside the womb, then that's the termination of a pregnancy. It is a difficult issue, and it's an emotional issue. But at the end of the day, it is a women's issue, and we've spent quite a lot of time talking about it. And as I said, we're two men; we don't really have a voice in this.
Okay, but as a man, I believe that all human life is precious. My wife, as a woman, believes that all human life is precious. So I don't see how our beliefs are different just because one's held by a woman and one's held by a man.
It's not about beliefs. This is a women's issue because it's something that affects women. Pregnancy and the termination of pregnancy doesn't affect men in any way, shape, or form.
It does. A lot of potential fathers are heartbroken by it, and also some women feel pressurized into abortions by the fathers, and also
okay. But if the man's heartbroken that the woman doesn't want the child, then that's unfortunate. But then that's going to be a byproduct of it. If the man can't carry the baby, if the man could carry the baby, then he could up to do so, but unfortunately, it's not his decision. And no man should ever force a woman to carry a baby if she feels that she can't carry that baby.
Right. And we go back to where you started. You said human rights are very central to your thinking. But the right to life, nothing's more fundamental than that, isn't it? So I would extend the right to life to all human life. But you would disagree.
Okay, so can we just imagine for a moment that the Scottish Family Party are the dominant party in the Scottish government?
Let me imagine. Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah. I'm sure you've thought about that a fair bit, Richard. You're the party leader. I wouldn't be surprised if you hadn't. Okay, so you've got a majority in the Scottish Parliament. What are the abortion laws that you enact?
Basically, we would have a virtually total ban on abortion, apart from in sort of exceptional circumstances where the mother's life is in the balance. So where there's a medical reason. And now some doctors say that there are actually no circumstances in which case actually killing the unborn child is necessary to save the mother's life. But assuming that sometimes it is, then that will be a case where that would be permitted. But in other circumstances, it wouldn't be.
So absolutely no termination of pregnancy unless it's to save the life of the mother.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So you would have to kind of make that a lot clearer because that's far too vague a law. If you terminate a pregnancy, a cesarean section is a termination of a pregnancy. Inducing birth is termination of a pregnancy.
Okay, killing the unborn child.
Okay, so if you enact that policy, you know that you're going to be forcing women to go underground and do it. You look at in countries where and states in the US where the procedure is banned, you're looking at high levels of teen pregnancy, high levels of babies being abandoned at fire stations, high levels of women going and having procedures that can potentially kill them, if not cause them far more damage than any medical procedure would have.
Okay, so let's go through those. So what tends to happen where abortion's banned is eventually people become more responsible in terms of their sexual activities. They become more responsible because the consequences become more serious. You said about babies being abandoned at fire stations. I would much prefer a baby be abandoned at a fire station than be killed before birth. So yes, it's very sad if babies are abandoned by their mother and their father as well, obviously. That's very sad, but I say I would rather life to death for that baby.
So you're obviously against sex before marriage as well.
The Scottish Family Party doesn't have a view. My personal view is that is the best plan. Yeah, as the evidence backs up.
So you said people would behave more sexually responsibly if there was a bigger risk that unwanted children could be had.
Yeah.
So are you against contraception?
The Family Party doesn't have a policy on that. Personally, no, I'm not.
Okay, so by increasing contraception and by increasing sex education in schools, then you're going to have, and evidence fully backs this up, increasing access to contraception for men and women, and sex education, comprehensive and frank sex education in schools leads to lower teen pregnancy rates and lower birth rates overall. And the lower birth rate.
I would just disagree with that. There's a professor I had on the live stream a while ago, David Payton. You can look him up on the internet. He's done a lot of research, doing sort of literature reviews, looking at the evidence relating to sex education and teenage pregnancies and various other outcomes. And he says basically the better the quality of the research, the less positive benefits sex education shows. To the point, the best quality research shows that it makes no difference. Something happened a few years ago when some councils had a sort of anti-teenage pregnancy education program that they're running, and some of the councils had to make budget cuts, so they had to abandon this program. And then the teenage pregnancy rates were tracked for those councils going forward, and the ones that had cancelled the program did better than the ones that continued with it. So I think it's a myth that there is evidence supporting the positive effect of so-called comprehensive sex education. I just don't think the evidence is really there.
Okay. Sorry, was it David Payton? Is that who you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. So from Nottingham University.
That's the man. Yeah.
Cool. Professor of Industrial Economics.
That's right. Yeah.
Not really qualified to talk about sex education then.
He's a statistician. He's dealt with a whole range of different issues, where he's looked into the available. He doesn't conduct research himself, but he's looked into the available evidence and drawn conclusions from it, from his academic standpoint.
Do you realise that anybody can, if you can play about with data, you can do some amazing things.
We can leave it there. Then. We can agree on that then. So your claim that is supported by evidence is therefore cancelled out. My claim that is not supported by is also cancelled out. So we can just leave academic research aside and look at it from other points of view. Is that fair?
Okay.
Yeah. Looking at it from other points of view, in terms of what, do you want to go back to marriage or to the effects of sex education?
I don't think we touched on marriage.
Okay, well, we're talking about sex before marriage. I think Now, okay, I was going to start talking about evidence, but let's not do that. Let's go down a different path. I mean, I believe that basically, if you look at this, let's say from a woman's perspective, what a woman wants from a man, more or less, in most cases, is they want a man to commit to them, to love them, to be faithful to them throughout their lives, and to be a father to their children, and to be present to help with that process of child rearing. That's what a woman is looking for, ideally. And what marriage does, as traditionally understood, is that says to men, right, the deal is, if you're going to have sex with a woman, then what you have to do is you have to publicly commit to do all these things that she wants before you get to have sex. And under that system, men, because they're keen to have sex, basically, to put it bluntly, are going to tend to agree to those conditions and agree to making those public commitments. And that therefore leads to more stable relationships, and it leads to men behaving in the way that women want them and need them to do. Therefore, it's a very positive institution.
Okay. Just so I understand what you just said there. So men only propose because they want to get a woman into bed, and through that, deep, loving, committed relationships will always spawn.
No. Two people fall in love with each other. But then what happens if the people have sex at a very early stage and they both had sex with lots of other people? Okay, they had sex. That was nothing special. They might have sex with someone else the next week. So the sex doesn't really have any great power. And then they decide to, move in together. And there's no real commitment to that. So they move in on the understanding that, we've moved in, but if one of us feels like moving out, one of us feel like moving out. Then they end up having a child or two, maybe planned, maybe unplanned. I mean, I'm not going to talk about statistics, but you can see this logically. That's more likely to lead to an unstable relationship. Whereas if there's a specific point in that relationship, whether the man and woman stand in front of their friends and family and make solemn promises to be faithful to each other throughout their lives, then that has a powerful effect. It changes the foundation of the relationship and tends to lead to a much more stable relationship, which is very important for adults and is even more important to children. So that's why, as the Scottish Family Party, we're keen to look at ways the government can play a part in promoting a strong culture of marriage in Scotland. There used to be a strong culture of marriage, I don't know, half a century ago, maybe more even, but it's been progressively eroded through recent decades. And we want to take steps to try to restore that. Do you think that would be a good thing? Would you like to see a stronger culture of marriage in Scotland, or do you think that would be a bad thing, or it doesn't matter?
I'm quite indifferent towards marriage, to be honest with you. I think if people want to get married, cool, that's totally up to them. If people want to remain happily unmarried throughout their lives, that's up to them as well. If people want to live together for their entire lives and not be married, if that's their plan, that's up to them. I think marriage is pretty irrelevant, to be honest with you.
Okay, I would say I'm concerned. I care about the children of the future. I would like the children of the future to be born into a stable family home and to be brought up by their mum and their dad, because I think that's best for them. So I believe the attitude that people can just choose whatever sort of relationship they like, move in together, have sex, or whatever, you just don't mind at all. Then what that's going to tend to lead to is more broken families, dysfunctional families, which is going to have a very negative effect on the children of the future. Now, to my mind, the freedom of adults to just live their life however that they choose. I'm not saying I want to have legal restrictions, but my advice to them, my exhortation to them, is to restrain their own freedom of choice, if you like, for the benefit of children in the future. It's also in their own self-interest as well, but they might not appreciate that. But for the benefit of children who might be born in the future, I would urge them to structure their relationships in a certain way.
Good. I take it you love your wife very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can I ask how long you've been married for?
We've been married for 22 years.
Well done, sir. Well done. Yeah, I've been with my partner. It'll be 10 years this year. We love each other very deeply. My daughter's from a previous relationship. Her daughter's from a previous relationship. So we kind of got that blended family, but we have such a deep family connection. But marriage is nowhere on the horizon. If we had the extra money to splurge on having a wedding, then yeah, go for it. But I don't see that happening anytime in the future.
Okay. What I'll say to you there is, I would say, forget about the expense of a wedding. You can get married very, very cheaply. The big day is not the important thing at all. The important thing is the promises and the commitment made.
But we've already done
that. In what way? That's obviously very personal. I mean, tell me.
No, it's not personal. We've promised ourselves to each other. We've promised ourselves to each other for the rest of our lives in front of the girls. And to me, that's okay. I'm an atheist, but that's a pretty sacred thing to me. That's okay. More important than a piece of paper that Mr. and Mrs.
Right. I would say what you did there was really good. I think that's a really positive thing to do. For the same reasons, I'm saying I think marriage is really positive. So instead of just like sliding into this relationship without it being on any sort of formal agreement, you've really laid it out to each other that this is the deal. You're committing to each other. I think that's brilliant. I think that would have been more powerful still, or would be more powerful still, if those promises were expressed in front of family and friends as well. Now, if you were to say, well, actually, I'm fine, I don't need that. We're doing perfectly well on our sort of promises we've made privately. That's absolutely fine for you. I would say maybe that's the case. Maybe that relationship is going to sustain through the rest of your lives, and that'd be absolutely great. But even so, with society in general, people in general, that relationships are going to be more stable in general with a culture of marriage rather than a culture of informal arrangements. Do you think that could be the case?
I would say that you need to have the freedom to be unmarried or married. If you want to have that part of your life, then you need to have that extra solidification as to be legally tied to each other. Then great, go for it. Have that ceremony. Promise yourself to each other in front of the people that you love, by all means. But promoting a culture of marriage is all fair and well, as long as people that aren't married don't suffer any consequences for not being married.
People that are not married are not going to suffer any consequences. I mean, currently there are some small benefits in the tax system. Not so much the benefits, certainly in the tax system. There are some small bonuses attached to being married. We would maybe increase those, so there would be more benefits. There would be more incentives for people to get married. But it's up to people to make their own decision. But we feel if we don't want to force people to get married, but if the culture and the encouragement, our society celebrated and valued marriage and understood the value of it, we feel that would have a positive effect overall. I say particularly for children. It's all fine for adults to say, we'll choose this is the way we choose it. But overall, I think the consideration of children is is very, very important. And I keep wanting to say the evidence, but we sort of agreed we won't do that. But stable family life benefits children. I know things don't always work out that way. People are imperfect. That obviously happens. Not every couple is going to stay together, and all sorts of families come into being through all sorts of changes, and that's absolutely fine. But we just want to maximize family stability, so as many children as possible are brought up in the ideal situation.
And just as a matter of interest, what's your opinion on like civil partnerships, heterosexual civil partnerships? If somebody doesn't want to say, go to a church and get married, they just want to have their civil ceremony at a registrar's or whatever.
Right.
I'm aware that registrars can marry, but if for example myself and my partner wanted to go and have a civil partnership and be civil partners instead of husband and wife, just out of pure interest, what's your thoughts on that?
Just to say, you can have a civil marriage, of course. You get married without any
religious. Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Civil partnerships for heterosexual couples, the Scottish Family Party is against them because it's offering marriage light. Effectively, it's a bit like it gives you some of the benefits of marriage, or most of the benefits of marriage, but it doesn't include a pledge of sexual fidelity, basically. So it takes out a key element of marriage and offers marriage light. So I think it's a very negative thing. It dilutes and undermines a culture of marriage in a society. Mm-hmm. Now, when they debated it, because it's coming in Scotland, when they debated it in the Scottish Parliament, a Conservative MSP stood up and he said, this is basically a cheat's charter, because it means you can be unfaithful. You could be what would have been adulterous if you're married, but because it's a civil partnership, there's no such thing as adultery. So he said it's a cheat's charter. And someone stood up and said, criticized with him and argued with him. And then the Conservative MSP stood up and said, I was only joking. But it shouldn't have only been joking, because it's absolutely true. It takes away a key element of what marriage is. So, we're not for that at all.
Okay, but I'm aware that there's plenty of husbands and wives that cheat on each other. But I think with the civil partnerships, I would need to check on that again, because taking away the legal requirement of fidelity in a civil partnership, mm-hmm. What would be the point in it then? I'm just questioning that for myself. I'm not calling you a liar or anything.
It gives a lot of the benefits that are related to marriage in terms of, for example, inheritance. Mm-hmm. For a married couple, if one of them dies, it's very straightforward. It goes to the other one. So it gives those sorts of benefits in terms of custody of children, taxes. There are lots of ways when it just gives the same benefits, legal tax benefits, or whatever, as marriage. But it doesn't include the sexual fidelity bit, because civil partnerships are introduced for same-sex relationships. And basically the government didn't want to get into trying to define what consummating a civil partnership was. They didn't want to go there. So they didn't go there. So that element was omitted in homosexual civil partnerships. So then when they talked about heterosexual civil partnerships, it was still omitted. So that's how we ended up there. Another thing with that, when you hear people saying we want civil partnerships for heterosexual couples, they often back it up by saying, because we think marriage is a patriarchal, oppressive institution or whatever, which I completely disagree with. So it often comes from a hostility to the institution of marriage. In the Scottish Parliament, when they debated it, that was very much where the MSPs were coming from. We need something better than marriage, because marriage is old-fashioned and whatever.
I mean, I would tend to agree that people would have negative associations with the institution of marriage for whatever reason. And if they have that civil partnership, then fair enough. But if I want to go down to the office with my partner and my daughters, and just sign a piece of paper, there's my witnesses, we're civil partners now. You don't think that's good enough to qualify as a married couple, even though we live as a married couple, do everything that married couples do, everything that married couples don't do.
I think it's just missing one important element.
Mm-hmm. It's the fidelity part.
the promise of sexual fidelity,
But
which is a pretty fundamental aspect of it.
The past 10 years, I've never been with anybody else apart from my partner. And
no,
you know
that's excellent. Yeah. But I think people in general, though, if you look at the society in general, if you've got 100,000 people, if they all get married, they're going to tend to be more faithful to each other than if they didn't get married, just because of that public vow and the explicit, public, solemn commitment to be sexually faithful has an important effect on people's behavior.
What about married couples that give each other consent to have sex with other people, but remain married and continue to have sex with each other? Well, that is something
I don't think it should be legal. I think it's very sad. I think that's not really marriage.
How would you police that?
I think ultimately they will hurt each other. They'll hurt other people, and they'll tend to hurt their children as well. And the relationship will tend to become unstable. So I think it's a disastrous route to go down, and I would discourage it.
I mean, I think that's, up to each individual couple. I don't think that, whatever your personal thoughts and opinions on that are, I don't think you should ever offer to legislate against that kind of behavior.
No, I'm not talking about legislation, but my concern.
You said it should be illegal. You literally just said it should be illegal.
No, I didn't. No.
You did. If you said, no, I didn't. I heard the word illegal, and you said you think it should be illegal.
Right. So, I'm not sure, but I certainly don't think that should be illegal. Adults should be free to structure their sexual relationships as they wish, but just some choices that adults make have very negative consequences for themselves, for other adults, and particularly for children. Bryan, I very much enjoyed chatting, and I'm sure we could have gone on for quite a bit longer, but our time has passed. Thank you for all the comments. I'm really sorry I haven't brought more on. I was quite engrossed in our conversation. I'll just bring one comment on. That's my wife arguing about how many years I said we've been married for. We'll continue the argument later.
Mary, he just wants to love you that extra year longer. That's all. Don't be mad at him, please.
Right. Well, Bryan, that was really fascinating, and it was very interesting. Thanks very much for coming on. Maybe Scotland's not a complete debate desert.
No.
So really enjoyed talking to you, and I think people have enjoyed listening to you as well. So maybe
talk again.
Maybe one day in the future you can come back and talk about some other things.
Absolutely.
But really enjoyed chatting.
Take care.
But thanks to everyone for watching. See you next week. We've got a special guest next week. Thanks very much to Bryan as well up in Dundee. And see you soon.
Good night.
Good night.